Well, welcome to everybody in the sanctuary. Welcome to everybody on Zoom. After last week, I don't think LJ needs any introduction, nor does Eriugena. I'm really looking forward to this. So we are going to fly right now. Over to you.
Turned on? Turned on, all right. Let's get started, shall we? So I invite you to close your eyes and sit back. Put your feet on the floor. Take a big, deep breath. And let everything else go while you listen to Eriugena's main message. The divine goodness, regarded as above all things, is said not to be, and to be absolutely nothing. It is the essence of the whole universe. So take another big, deep breath. And just be in the silence for a moment. Amen. So welcome back. We're talking about John Scotus Eriugena, whom his name really just means John Irishman. So we don't really know his last name, but we call him Eriugena, Eriugena. It's a hard word to say, but it's the Latinized version of Irish or Irish born. And we talked about how John presents to us a Celtic way of spiritual liberation. He's all about unleashing our consciousness and knowing reality as it is. Well, we get more into it tonight. I introduced this book last week, but I brought the book. This is Eriugena's masterpiece. It's a big sucker. It's 700 pages, small type, and it is not always a joy to read. It's a little technical at times. Yeah, you can take this to bed with you and you will very, very quickly fall asleep. Yeah. But as you can tell, Parafusion is the title, and it means on reality or on nature. You might think of the word physical. Physis is Greek for nature, but in Latin, it's natura. Natura and physis are not really the physical body only or the physical realm only. It's for Eriugena, it's all of reality, everything. And almost immediately, within the first few paragraphs of this 700-page book, Eriugena writes about the divisions of nature. And that's your first quote on your sheet right here. You're welcome to follow along or just listen if that's easier for you. And Eriugena writes, the division of nature by means of four differences results in four species, being divided first into that which creates and is not created, secondly into that which is created and also creates, thirdly into that which is created and does not create, while the fourth neither creates nor is created. But within these four, there are two pairs of opposites, where the third is the opposite of the first, the fourth of the second. But the fourth is classed among the impossibles, for it is of its essence that it cannot be. So you can tell just by reading that one paragraph, tongue-twisting kind of paragraph, this isn't a page turner. But there's some really good stuff in here. His highly original synthesis of the gospel and philosophy, mostly Neoplatonic philosophy, it centers again on reality, all of reality. And he proceeds by way of these four divisions. The first one is that which creates and is not created, God. The second one is creating, but also created. And for Eriugena, as any good philosopher, they theorize there are these kind of causes in the world, metaphysical causes. It gets really confusing, frankly. But it's almost like something between us and God. You almost might think of them like the angels, but they kind of have some power over the universe. And then that which does not create and is created, and that's all of us. That's the whole universe or the multiverse or whatever it is. And then the last one, neither creates nor is created, back to God. But really, really, it's all God. And if you ever have a question about Eriugena, where he stands on things, you can always come back to, it's pretty much all God. Nature is to be understood as what is real in the widest sense, the totality of all things. Nature includes God and creation. And you can almost put it like this, everything, and this is his whole schema for understanding the creation of the universe and what's going to happen at the end of time. We're coming from God and we're returning to God. So imagine like a big circle, God's at the top, everything comes out of God and everything is now pluriform, and there's lots of different creatures, there's lots of different things in the universe, and then everything eventually comes back to God. But everywhere, every point along that circle is also God. Birds are still birds, trees are still trees. Eriugena has been accused of being a pantheist, but he respects things on their own too. So it's this very fine line he walks. It's the fine line of the incarnation. I think this is where his thinking is rooted. It's in the incarnation. Jesus is somehow both God and human at the same time. And Eriugena is really just pulling back the veil on all of reality, saying, yeah, that's the whole universe. So for him, Jesus is the great reminder. That's how Jesus saves. Jesus saves by reminding us of our true reality, that we're all always already one with God. And you have two other little quotes down there. These are almost like mantras, you might say. I might suggest them to you as mantras. And they're Latin phrases. Essentia omnium, which means God is the essence of all things. Essentia omnium, the essence of all things. And God is omnino nihil, absolutely nothing. And those two contraries coexist at the same time. That God is somehow the essence, the supreme essence, and yet also the nothing. I mean, as I said last week, he has a whole treatise within this 700-page book called On Nothingness. And he spends, a good 100 pages just talking about nothing. All the different meanings of nothing. But this is really important to understand. This might be a good shorthand for you if you want to know what is Eriugena after. He wants us to know, and not intellectually know, but to see, to experience, to know in our bones. God is the essence of everything. This God who is absolutely nothing. He wants us to know that our journey is to go from God and go back to God. Because see, all these different divisions of nature that he's talking about, it's either God in God's self, that's species 1 and 4. So that which is created, that which creates and is not created is God in God's self. Division 4, that which is not created and does not create, that's God. But the middle ones, both terms that are created, are God manifest. God manifest. And that is the key distinction. That's how Eriugena can say God is everything and also not everything. Because everything that is, the whole cosmos, is a manifestation of God. And that is really central to his mysticism. or as he puts it, everything that is light. Light is a key metaphor for God, for Eriugena. Light is that which reveals. So everything in the cosmos, even as we said last week, even COVID-19, everything, because this is unconditional. This is a supernova. This is a beautiful sunset. This is a butterfly. This is a wolf spider. This is a crying baby. This is COVID-19, everything. Everything is a manifestation of the divine. So if creation is nothing else than the manifestation of the hidden God, then not only must God create out of God's self, but it also follows that the fundamental nature of all creation is its ability to illuminate, to reveal this hidden divine nothingness. So our true nature is to reveal. We are supposed to be, you might say, icons of God or windows into the divine. That's our, and each one of us might do it differently. He's speaking in a lot of generalities, but I would say each one of us does this a little differently. And then he allows him to say, God is absolutely simply one, and yet, because God is also the deepest reality of everything, God has all these different characteristics. God has your personality. God has the personality, yes, of Donald Trump. God has the personality, yes, of Kevin McCarthy, or of, I forgot his name last week, Hakeem Jeffries, or Hillary Clinton, or whomever. The divine self-manifestation. So this is how to understand creation, because I think normally we understand God creates things almost like, how the founding fathers of our country understood it, right? God is the great watchmaker. And the watchmaker makes a very intricate device, the watch, but then closes the lid on the watch and it does its own thing, and the guy is over here. And there's no more connection. That's not how this God creates. This God is involved in every aspect of creation. God, you could say in our terms, God is the power behind evolution. God is the frog going onto the mainland in that critical step of evolution. God is you driving on 495. God is any and everything. God is, people suffering right now in Turkey. But God is also, a child laughing. So it's the beautiful and the tragic all at once. Any good mystic, just take this as a rule of thumb. Any good mystic has to deal in paradox. Has to. Because otherwise reality gets simplistic, and from simplistic thinking usually comes fanaticism, and fanaticism always leads to violence. But if you can hold opposites together, they can change you. So this is part of Eriugena's way of studying. We're going to talk a little bit about practice tonight. And one of his major practices is just study. So in other words, read. Read, maybe don't read Parafusion, but read something. Read to know reality. I mean, you could read it if you want, but it's going to be hard. It's hard for the professionals to read. So, and doesn't matter how smart you are, it's just hard. Eriugena says studies, make connections. Because it doesn't just mean read, he means to really make connections. And I think you were making connections last week when you were in your small groups, just that kind of conversation. That's why we do small groups in adult ed, to help you make connections and verbalize what you're learning. So study is a big thing for him. I mean, he came from Ireland, an emerald isle of study and prayer. Those are his two ways, study and prayer, and being a good Celt, nature, finding God in the natural world. So everything, the natural world very much included, is God manifesting God's self. God showing God's self to whom, you might say? To God. Because as we're going to get into, God doesn't even know God fully. God, let me say that again. Because we might think, again, we have all these kind of things we think about God. God is a creator, is someone separate. No, as a self-manifesting God, God is completely one with and the essence of everything that exists. So involved in every little detail of your life. As a Jesuit I used to know who would take that phrase, the devil is in the details, you know that phrase? He'd say, no, the divine is in the details. That is Eriugena, the divine. That's really Celtic too, by the way. Very, the divine is in the details. It's in that moment last night when I was coating my drumsticks, my chicken drumsticks in butter and putting some some breadcrumbs on and putting it in the oven. That was all. That all could have been a prayer. I was thinking about the Super Bowl. The divine self-manifestation is just, that's how God works. God wants to create out of the joy of doing it and to reveal God's self to God. And that self-manifestation, by the way, is what we call the Word. That's the Word. That's God, the Word taking over. And this hidden nothingness, silence, this divine darkness, another metaphor he uses, that's analogous to the Father or the Mother, you might say. We ought not, Eriugena says, and this is one of your quotes. I think this is on the back of your sheet. Yes, this is on the back of your sheet, the first one on the back. We ought not to understand God and the creature as two things distinct from one another, but as one and the same. For both the creature by subsisting is in God, and God, by manifesting the divine self in a marvelous and ineffable manner, creates the divine self in the creature. Oh, wow. Yeah. How about that? God created God when you came into existence. How about that? Or he also says, speaking of the natural world, of the environment, observe the forms and beauties of sensible things and see the word of God in them. If you do so, the truth will reveal to you in all such things only the one who made them. So there he's talking about a new consciousness. He doesn't mean see with your physical eyes. He means to comprehend, to understand, to know that the birds that are chirping, the trees that are growing, the grass and the flowers and the foxes and what else do we have around here? Raccoons, squirrels. Yeah. Yes, even the rats that I see when I'm in downtown DC, all of them, if you can see them with a fresh mind, well, they become theophanies, windows into God. And again, that word, I want you to hold on to that word, theophany, a word that means a showing or a manifestation of God, because everything is. And we're going to do a little prayer right now. And this is on your sheet. It's the last quote. It's kind of arranged in a unique way on your sheet. I invite you to close your eyes, take a deep breath, and center yourself. Come to rest in silence. Take a big, deep breath. And just listen. Everything that is understood and sensed is nothing else but the apparition of what is non-apparent, the manifestation of the hidden, the affirmation of the negated, the comprehension of the incomprehensible, the utterance of the unutterable, the access to the inaccessible, the understanding of the unintelligible, the body of the bodiless, the essence of the super essential, the form of the formless. Take a big, deep breath. And then read that passage to yourself. And just notice which of those terms, manifestation of the hidden, essence of the superessential, which one appeals to you? Just hold on to that. So hold on to the one that grabs you, the one that you like the most. And that can be your way to understand theophany. There's more than this. I cut him off because he, again, 700 pages. He wrote a lot more pairs here, like manifestation of the hidden. But this can be your way to understand theophany and how God creates, why God creates. Because God wants to show God's self. Because this God, as I've said a few times already, is nothing. Let's listen to Eriugena again. The ineffable, incomprehensible, and inaccessible brilliance of the divine goodness, which is unknown to all intellects, human or angelic, because it is superessential and supernatural. I should think that this designation, nothing, is applied because when it is thought through itself, it, the divine nature, neither is, nor was, nor will be. For in no existing thing is it understood, since it is beyond all things. But here's the key line. When God is understood as incomprehensible on account of God's excellence, God is not improperly called nothing. So we don't mean God doesn't exist. We mean it's the mystic's way of saying, we don't know what God is. And God is so beyond, so great, so transcendent, so mysterious. It's almost like God is nothing. Yeah. And God is not one of the things in this earth, or in one more thing, one more item, one more object in the universe. So when he calls God nothing, he means God transcends being. God is nothing because God is transcendent. That's the excellence of the divine nature that is incomprehensible. Now, there's a great corollary here from what we've been saying. And this is something that most mystics wrestle with. And it kind of goes back to this idea I told you before of the watchmaker. If God is a watchmaker, God is separate from creation. If God is manifesting the divine self in creation, well, then there's no separation. Well, what does that mean? Because don't we believe God creates out of nothing? Isn't that a fundamental Christian doctrine? Creatio ex nihilo. It was a fundamental doctrine back in the 800s when Eriugena was writing. And he says, yeah, we should still believe in creatio ex nihilo, except the nothing out of which God creates is God. It's God. God creates from the superabundant nothingness of the divine nature. He says, really, creation is from the nothing that is God, and all things are a theophany of that infinite nothingness, and all things are returning to the joy and the play of that infinite nothingness. So God, as the nothing, includes all, holds all, encircles everything that is contained in all things, because everything comes from and returns to this nothing. So you see, there's just this kind of reciprocity, this circular kind of vision of reality. It's not God created at this one moment in time, God took off, the universe was left to run on its own. Oh, he came back, God came back, to call the Israelites, and then, get Abraham going, and then to get, Jesus going. And then, God took off for a little while longer. God will be back at the end, And now we don't actually think that, right? As Christians, if you interrogate a Christian, they might say, no, that's not what I believe. But that's kind of our imaginary. That's kind of the way we function, almost unconsciously. Like that's how we sort of live our lives. Maybe you've heard this term. It's something like a religious atheist. The term is practical atheists. Practical atheists. So, yeah, there might be a ton of people going to church. Well, maybe not anymore, but at one point there was a ton of people going to church, but the reality of God wasn't impinging on their daily lives. And you know what's even sadder? Sometimes this is true in places like monasteries, where it's just prayer services and then I do what I want. And this isn't to rag on people or to unduly criticize people, but we do tend to focus on ourselves and our own experience. And Eriugena might say, yeah, that's closing down your light. That's extinguishing your light. Doesn't Jesus say, right? To be a light, to let your light shine before others. Eriugena says, yeah, of course I agree with Jesus. And if you don't, you will become dark inside. You'll become ignorant, or unconscious is maybe the better way to put it. That line in the Gospels, it's kind of an enigmatic line. It's found in the Sermon on the Mount. Let your eye be single. If your body is full of light, the light will be great. But if you see darkness, the darkness will enter into you, something like that. And it's a strange metaphor. You think, what is Jesus talking about? He's talking about unless you keep your consciousness free, you can fall into unconsciousness. This is how we can sort of understand what Eriugena is talking about. A theophany is not only a moment or an experience, but a person or a being that is conscious, that is open to the divine. Now, birds aren't conscious like we are, and neither are stones, even though scientists say there might be levels of consciousness in all of those creatures. But to be a real theophany, we're included. We have to be fully conscious, fully open, fully awake. Well, Eriugena says, yeah, if you're not awake, if you aren't a light, then you'll be ignorant and unconscious. And we have a lot of unconscious people walking around today, bumping into each other and getting really upset with each other over nothing, things that don't matter. I almost wonder if God's going, oh, are they doing that again? and it's almost like you go, oh, really? They're doing that again? They're getting upset over an election? Oh my God. Or whatever, we get so upset about such trivial things sometimes. But when we hold on to this vision and see that actually everything you do, everything that you experience in a day is just a window into the infinite nothingness, into the he also calls God, by the way, the divine goodness, right? So he's not just using one negative set of metaphors. God is incredibly good, incredibly loving. God creates out of the divine nothingness because God is love too. God creates purely out of love. That's a clear motivation also from God in Eriugena's thinking. If we can see that, if we can just understand that every little thing, every little detail of my life can be a moment to become conscious and free and awake to God, then the things that upset me, the things that annoy me, they fade into the background. They kind of, what they kind of do? They kind of fall away. It's not as if you realize in a very moral way, oh, this stuff is bad and I'm going to stop it. You just go, it's just not worth my time. It's just not worth my slate. It's almost like you you're watching a bad movie and then you realize, hey, I'm watching a bad movie and I don't have to sit here. I can turn the TV off, or I can get out of I can leave and not sit in the theater. I can get up and walk out. It's kind of like that, instead of just an outright, and this is where Christianity has gone wrong, I think. Let's deny the world. Let's say the world is bad and sinful and evil. The world is not sinful for Eriugena because it's a manifestation of God. Each and every creature. And creature here, you can understand again in a wide sense. Don't just think of animals or of nature. Think of your own individual experiences. Think in terms of space and time. Think not just, of a beautiful sunset, but you drinking coffee, enjoying the sunset. Every little part of that, even the clothes you wear, even the feel of the wind against your knuckles. It's that. If the divine is in the details, it is that specific. How is this possible? This is where Eriugena lapses into mystery. He doesn't know. How, therefore, Eriugena writes, can the divine nature understand of itself what it is, seeing that it is nothing? So he says, not only do we not know, God doesn't know. For God surpasses everything that is. Since God is not even being, but all being derives from God. Now I'm putting God in the quotes. If you read your quotes, these two quotes I just read are in your sheets. Eriugena calls God not he, but it, which, he precedes feminist theology by a long time. But I think it's his way of showing us that God's neither man nor woman, right? God's beyond gender just as much. So God doesn't know what God is, and that's why God creates. We do not know what God is. God himself does not know what he is, because God is not anything. So catch that line of thinking. God does not know what God is because God is not anything, because God is incomprehensible. So God's unknowableness is so great and so characterizes God that even God's mind cannot comprehend God's own self. Yes, again, get comfortable with mystery and paradox. So to know God's self, God creates. And that knowing is so enjoyable that God invites us to know God too. Imago Dei, right? The Bible says we are the image of God. Eriugena took that seriously, and he was influenced greatly by St. Gregory of Nyssa in this regard, because he thought, like St. Gregory of Nyssa, that creatio ex nihilo doesn't mean God creates just out of purely nothing, and so we're not really connected to God in any way. No, God creates out of God. But also, God creates us in a special way. Just as God is unknown to the divine self, the human mind is really unknown to itself. That you and I also, just as God is supreme mystery, you and I are also mysteries unto ourselves. So here's another quote from him. This is also on your sheet. This might be, let's see, the third quote on the back. The third quote on the back. The human mind both knows itself and does not know itself. It knows that it is. It does not know what it is. And through this, the image of God is especially thought to be in humanity. The human mind, this is great. The human mind is more to be praised in its ignorance than in its knowledge. The word he's really saying there is unknowing, which is a word that has a great deal of heft in Christian mystical theology. Unknowing is not unconsciousness. It's knowing beyond the mind, knowing beyond thinking, beyond reason, beyond the normal mental processes of our consciousness, knowing beyond the mind to know God. So he says, you and I are the image of God precisely because we are also infinitely nothing. We are infinitely mystery too. That's what makes us God, the images of God in a special way. In other words, if we allow our minds to be unleashed, we can know God, as God knows God. So another way to put this, if you don't like all this negative stuff, another way to put this is, God is infinitely knowable. In other words, there will never be an end to knowing God. There will never be an end to God knowing you. There will never be an end to us knowing God. There will never be an end to all of us knowing each other in God and as God. It just won't ever end. It's just infinite, everlasting knowingness. But there's a big but, isn't there? Do you experience that right now? I'm willing to bet you likely don't. I mean, it's just human, right? Well, Eckhart, I keep saying Eckhart here. It's these mystics. Eriugena has a way for us. He does outline study as a way, but he goes beyond study too. And this is another quote on your sheet. I think it's the last one. This gets us into his spiritual practice. No one may draw near to him, God, who does not first, by persevering in the way of thought, there's study. And again, it's not just books and taking notes and thinking through things. I want you to understand study is making connections. Making connections. It will involve thinking. And it might involve books, but it'll also involve conversation, not just, it's a lot of educational models that just say, yeah, teaching is really just, downloading the professor's input. It's like you open up your head and you just put the professor's knowledge in there. That's all teaching in. The educational experiences. No, the educational experience is something that's supposed to be dynamic. So everything I'm telling you tonight, hopefully you're taking in, you're filtering it through your own experience. You're trying to even understand, what is this guy talking about, Eriugena? And then when we give you time to talk, you can process it. You can pick out what is the most important thing from tonight. Because the thing is, you don't need to read all these people. You don't need to read this whole book. Last year we did Anthony DeMello. You don't have to listen to all his programs. You don't have to read all of Meister Eckhart's sermons. You don't even have to read the Bible. I hesitated to say that. Only because those are all pointers. Those are all that meant to help you to unleash consciousness, to wake up. So it might just be, and this is, by the way, overlooking something. We always tend to overlook this. Jesus never wrote anything down. That is, he never wrote anything down for posterity. Maybe he wrote something down, but he never wrote down a treatise and gave it to his apostles. He just said, no, you don't need that. But that doesn't mean you don't need some sort of study, whether through conversation, interaction, or maybe even reading. So all of that to say, yes, read, but don't make it the end all be all, right? Because that's I wonder if we don't get stuck there sometimes as a society. If I'm not reading something, or if I don't have a book on my list, I maybe don't feel as smart. Enlightenment, and this is what Eriugena is talking about. He's talking about us waking up to God. Enlightenment does not require books. Books can help, but that doesn't require books. You might find that your journey's made up of a lot of books, but just know, and I want to give you permission. The book you're reading right now, you can put down. And you cannot come back to it ever again. And I do that all the time. I'll read Eriugena, I'll read Eckhart, I'll read a bunch of different people, and I'll go, that's enough. That's enough for now. And then I'll come back to them. And what's great is that book doesn't change, but I change. And so a year from now, I might read Eriugena and go, whoa, this is even better than I thought. or something, maybe you have a favorite passage. I love that passage from Jesus in the Gospels, consider the lilies of the field, the birds of the air. Every time I read that, it hits me differently. Yeah, there's a theologian that says that's a true sign of a classic. What's that theologian's name? Well, that's a true sign of a classic. It keeps coming back. It keeps hitting you in different ways because you change. Well, we stop there with study. That's not the only way. So no one can draw near to God who does not first, by persevering in the way of thought or study. Here's the key. Abandon all the senses and the operations of the intellect, together with the sensibles and everything that is and that is not, and having achieved a state of not knowing, is restored to the unity, as far as possible, of him who is above every essence and understanding, of whom there is neither reason nor understanding, who is neither spoken nor understood, for whom there is neither name nor word. He could have just said incomprehensible. He chose to be a little longer. Again, 700 pages. Basically abandon all the operations of the intellect, meaning stop thinking. Stop thinking. And spiritual teachers today are very clear on this. The good ones. People like Thomas Keating or Richard Rohr, or someone who's really not a part of any religion, Eckhart Tolle. They're very clear. This is what unites good spiritual teachers. You need time when you're not trapped in your thinking. Because most of us are trapped in our conditioned thinking. It's not just thinking per se. Eriugena and the other mystics will say, thinking cannot get you to God because God is beyond thought. But then you add in another layer, our thinking is usually very negative. And it can be very toxic, and it can be very conditioned by what the world considers, the world here meaning society considers, good, which is not always inherently good, by the way. So when he says abandon all the operations of the intellect, he means stop thinking. Achieve a state of not knowing. Again, it's remarkable. It's remarkable how consistent some of these mystics are. Because in the Middle Ages, it isn't just Eckhart, it's Marguerite Porete, it's Henry Suso, it's the cloud of unknowing. They all say, get into a state of unknowing, a state of nothingness, a state of inner silence, in which you're not thinking, but are simply one with God, because you don't have to, this is what's so great about this. You don't have to create unity with God. It's already there. Another thing I think we tended to misunderstand about the gospel, we tend to think we have to reach our way up to God. We have to get to God. We have to do all the work. God's already taken care of that. You don't have to go get God. God's right here, right now. Again, like the wind on your knuckles, but even closer, like the blood flowing through your veins, even closer, like the atoms swirling that make up the molecules, that make up the different particles, that make up all the little building blocks. That is you. God is the power in and underneath and over and beyond all of that. That's how wrapped up God is in your life and in mine. So we don't have to achieve divine unity. It's not something to get. It's not a goal to attain. It's already here. So Eriugena really wants you to sink into this present moment. That's what not knowing means. Letting go of your thinking, because let's be real, our thinking is usually about either past or future. Rarely are we just focused here now. So stop thinking, let go of the past, let go of the future. God's already here. He counsels us in another area to be wholly detached from earthly thoughts. So he's saying it right out in the open there. In unknowing, the soul stops thinking and rests in the divine nothing, who is the essence of all. And when we stress the divine nothing, that really relativizes everything that we consider important. Because Eriugena says, the nothing is what's important. The divine goodness is what's important. And when you stop thinking for a little while, you begin to realize that. And so other things that had just such monumental importance for me fall away. Now, the secret is they don't actually fall away all at once. Unless you manage to be present all the time. Then they kind of fall away, but it tends to fall away gradually, but they do fall away. So the way of liberation that Eriugena is describing is a way of knowingness that we enter into, paradoxically, by unknowingness. The mind must be set free from being identified with limited knowing. This is another way you might put the whole question of being attached to things. We limit our own knowing. So you might just ask yourself that question, how do I limit my knowing? And I'll try and give you an example here. I limit my knowing when I'm preoccupied by worrying, when I'm preoccupied by worrying about something. And then you know how you get, let me just get through this event. maybe we were thinking this beforehand, right, Peg? So let me just get through tonight and then I can do this when I get home and I'll be fine. That's the kind of thinking that is future oriented and colored by worry and anxiety, right? You can be here and now. And again, here's the paradox. This isn't going to solve your feelings of anxiety right away. But if you can be here and now and sit with those feelings, they become a little relativized, meaning they don't tend to drive you as much as they normally do. They don't tend to control you as much as they normally do. So Eriugena calls this contemplation, oddly enough, or he also calls it, and this is I like this term, I never thought of it, universal contemplation, because it's a way open. And he doesn't get into this, but universal contemplation suggests it's open to everybody. So it's interesting. He doesn't really consider, even though Islam is a force, at this time, but it's not really in the thought world of the Holy Roman Empire that much. So other religions are not really a factor, maybe Judaism, but it's a very Christian world. So there's not a lot of diversity. And it's very white, very white and very Christian. But he has an opening there to seeing the value of other religions. Universal contemplation. Because what I just described, being detached from thinking, well, you can find that in Buddhism very clearly. You can find that in Hinduism. You can find that in Sufism. You can find that in Kabbalah and Judaism. It's everywhere, right? It's the kind of one of the deeper aspects of all religions. So a scholar named Dermot Moran, who wrote probably the best study on Eriugena, it's a little bit more technical, but it's probably the best one out there. It's another one to recommend to you. I am now forgetting the name of that study. I think it's called The Philosophy of John Scotus Eriugena. I'll get that book for you, the name of that book. Moran says, it is the recognition, this liberation, this contemplation, is the recognition of the mind's own unlimited nature, which permits the human mind to transcend itself and gain unity with the Godhead. And he calls it, quote, negative knowing, or unknowing. It's the kind of knowing that says, everything that I've used to know doesn't work. So let me put that aside and just be quiet and be silent and internally be nothing to realize the divine nothing. It's pure consciousness. That's another way to put it too. Pure consciousness. Instead of being aware of or conscious of something, it's just consciousness, pure and simple. Eriugena describes it this way: a knowing which is itself formless. Formless knowing. Not a knowing that is centered on forms. And forms can be external, can be chairs, they can be you or I, they can be a fire extinguisher, they can be a candle or a cross, or they can be forms in our head, not just pictures of things, but thoughts and subtle concepts too. Put them all aside. Formless knowing. So when we put them aside, when we let go of our thinking, yes, we realize our unlimited nature. We realize that to be more specific than just saying, I am, you don't want to walk around saying, I am the infinite nothingness. They might throw you into some institution. Eriugena wants you to say, I am Christ. To put all this aside, to unleash consciousness is to become Christ. Because Christ was this pure consciousness embodied in our world. And it's really interesting in the book here in Paraphusion, he doesn't so much dwell on the crucified Christ, but the resurrected Christ, which is something, frankly, after his time, you almost never see. Really, until most recently in the past 100 years, has there been more of a focus on the risen Jesus. You think of people like St. Francis or, anybody in the Middle Ages, or Luther, right, too, right? Everybody was focused on the cross, on Jesus crucified. And the resurrection kind of, it's so weird that it kind of took a back seat, even though it's this great, big eschatological act of God saying death has no more hold on you. Why wouldn't we be consumed by that like they were in the early church? Eriugena was consumed by it. And he said, that's the way. The resurrection signifies this unlimited nature of our minds. So to realize this Christ nature and to become happy. That's what we're talking about here, being unlimitedly happy. Being, maybe the better word for it is blissful. To do that, you do have to let go of your thinking. To unleash consciousness, we let go of thinking, and in silence, without our doing anything about it, we identify with omnino nihil, the absolutely nothing. So let's try it, shall we? So I invite you to put your feet on the floor, your hands in your lap, and sit up relatively straight. We'll just do it for a minute or so, but I want to lead you into silence, contemplative silence. Let your eyes close gently. And I invite you to abandon all the operations of your intellect. And so enter the state of not knowing. To be restored to unity with the nothing, who is above every being and understanding. Detached from your thinking, unknow the divine goodness, the absolute nothingness, who is the essence of the whole universe. And once more, big, deep breath. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Amen. So let's get into some groups. There's, 6 of you here right now. So maybe you can just pair off. You want to just pair off? And get into your groups, and then I'll give you some questions to talk about. All right, so you have about 15 minutes, and then we'll take some questions or comments from you guys. But talk about, you can talk simply about what you're taking away from the session, what questions still remain, or you can talk about how might you incorporate a vision of theophanies into your own life? How might you notice more theophanies? Or you can ask yourself, how does this understanding of both God and the human person as nothingness, how does that strike you? What difference does that make for you, if any? And if not, why? Why nothingness? So go ahead. All right, so any comments, questions? If you have any questions, my answer is going to be, I don't know. Yeah, join me in the unknown.
Well, I don't know that's a question so much as it is a recognition. When Eriugena talks about study, um, for me, when study is not learning, I come into relationship with the author and I begin to experience that author's experience. And sometimes it jumps right out of the book. I mean, it really literally does. And so I think that is for me, that resonated with me. And when he talked about that, it's not the end thing. You don't do it because you're going to be knowledgeable. You do it out of relationship.
That's a great way to put it, and probably gives a better flesh to what he's talking about with study. Weren't we talking last week about lineage? That it's the spiritual teacher passing on his or her experience. And it's not something you need to be knowledgeable about, right? You can be, I was listening to a podcast about how this person who predicted the 2016 election and then predicted the midterms, it's like, there's a lot of data that goes into those predictions, and you have to understand a lot of things. I use that word very intentionally, by the way. You understand data points. You understand, surveys, what different responses to surveys, what different polls have mean, or what the percentages of different polls, right? So lots of knowledge. This is a great way to put it. Knowledge to master. What you're talking about, Peg, and what Eriugena is talking about is not knowledge to master, but almost like you're being gripped by the knowing of the author, the experience of the author. Yeah. The hard thing for us, I think, is when he uses the word knowing, it may be hard for us to get it. It's wide. This knowing is wide. It's experiential. It's beyond experience. It's the kind of the silence of faith, as much as the feel of the sun's rays on your face. It's all and both of those things. It's the sensible, it's the tactile, and it's the non-sensible and the non-tactile. And it's the abstract and the concrete. So that's one of the things to keep in mind as you're reading, well, if you choose to read Eriugena, but reading any mystic, the paradox. But the key is holding them both together. So that you might want to get acquainted with the thought world of John Scotus Eriugena. So you read Dermot Moran or Deirdre Carabine. They're all Irish people who study. Unsurprisingly, it's like all Irish scholars, but you read Deirdre or you read Dermot. But just because you've maybe, quote, mastered knowledge about Eriugena, that's not what he wants you to know. Yeah, that's not what he wants you to know, the experience he has. The experience he had, right? That's the passing on. So when you can see things like Eriugena saw them, just like if you kind of catch, and this has been true of all the people I've talked about here with you folks. It's especially true of someone like St. Francis. he did not really write anything. He dictated some things to write down, but they're very sparse his writings. Saint Bonaventure wrote, yeah, he was the guy who chronicled Francis. But Francis, you had to hang out with Francis to catch what he was doing. It's again, to use COVID-19 as a metaphor, you gotta, if you hang out with somebody who has COVID-19, you're gonna get it, right? If you hang out with Francis long enough, you're gonna get what turned Francis on. And not only that, but you're gonna catch his passion, you're gonna catch his experience. And a good book, a good classic book, I still don't remember that theologian's name, will do that too. And sometimes even not that great a book will do that because you are in a good place. Yeah. So study is more like that. Yes. So that's why I said, it doesn't, whenever you get rigid about something, that might be a sign to stop. So if you're I have to finish this book. Why? Why just because you say you finished it? You don't need, you can put it down. It's okay. Doesn't mean you won't finish it later, right? But yes, but nevertheless, books can still do that. They can still pass on. That's why I keep reading the sermons of Meister Eckhart. I mean, I keep coming back to them because they still feed me. They still broaden my vision. I hope you have some book like that can broaden your vision. Again, it doesn't even have to be a religious book. And again, sometimes it's not the Bible. That's a strange thing. It's just that over time, that's been the book we've most turned to, and that has most opened people's eyes. Yeah. I love the Bible, by the way. I'm not trying to disparage the Bible. I'm being washed by the angels. Yeah. Yeah, Lisa.
I might only be just about to say again what you just said as my brain digests it and understands it. But something about this conversation is making me think about communities like this. Why do we show up in places like this? We want to show up in places where the things that speak to us, that speak to our hearts, we want to get in a space with other people who want to talk about those things. And we, I don't know, in my contemplative circles, we often sort of chuckle about these conversations you have and you go, I can't have this conversation just anywhere because you can't. And so something about this idea of reading, sometimes I'll feel like, well, am I going to read right now? Or I'm going to sit and be quiet right now? Am I going to pray right now? And I'm conscious that the reading sometimes is the prayer. And something about this conversation is making me realize that the things that I choose, those kinds of things that I choose to read, those writers, the contemplatives and the mystics, when I'm reading that, it is that it's about who I'm choosing to hang out with. And so, right? So I'm choosing to hang out with these people. And what pulls us into the same place is that we all do the same when we go, that's who I want to hang out with too. So it's almost like the reading that we have access to, that's part of our community almost, right? We're literally kind of hanging out with these people and understanding them to be actually part of how we live. Yeah. Okay. I think I was just talking to myself, but thank you for letting me do that.
No, that's great. That's great.
But as you understand them more and more, you want to understand them more and more.
Yes. And look at that. It's just like God. The more you kind of catch what Eriugena is not only saying, but trying to communicate experientially, the more you want to know about him. Yeah, it's almost like God designed it that way. Yeah.
Did you say they just started translating him in the 90s?
They just started taking him seriously, I think, in the 70s.
Okay.
But this translation I have here, which is by John O'Meara, again, they're all Irish. It's just crazy how many. I don't know. There might be some scholars lately who are not Irish. This is 1987. And I think this is the first complete English translation. Actually, I don't know that. There might be an older one from the 70s, but I don't think there's one older than the past century. Maybe snippets of it. And it was written in Latin, but
but his stuff was just sitting in libraries.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't like any
Oh,
sort
yeah.
of archaeological discovery. It was
No, it was more of a manuscript discovery. They're always discovering manuscripts in old libraries, for instance, in Europe, this was here the whole time. Yeah, it was. And sometimes his works would, and this happens to a lot of mystics who kind of get not only forgotten about, but intentionally forgotten about. Their works might survive under other names. So I think his homily on the prologue of John survived under another name. But then he was condemned in the 1200s. So that meant if there were copies of him, they would have been hidden away. Likely someone, this is my fanciful imagination, but I imagine someone like Eckhart discovered Eriugena in a library in the University of Paris. Probably there was a copy of Parafusion at the University of Paris. It was the university. So Eckhart likely, he sounds too much like Eriugena in some places. He likely found a copy. And like I said last week, the Kabbalists, the early Kabbalists, Jewish, they may have read him too, and they may have influenced Jewish mysticism in the Middle Ages. So there were copies floating around. We don't know where they were, but they obviously survived because we have it, right?
Well, what
Yeah.
sparked the modern interest? Was it
That's a good
Irish
question.
nationalism or?
That's a good question, because he was actually on Irish money before the euro. He was on one of their bills. It might have been. Actually, that's a good question. I don't know what sparked the recovery of Eriugena. Likely because Ireland is uber Catholic. It might have had something to do with the Second Vatican Council, when part of the Second Vatican Council that happened in the 60s was, and it was a really good thing, religious orders were encouraged to go back to their roots. So Franciscans go back to Francis, Dominicans go back to Dominic, maybe Meister Eckhart too. In that shuffle, I wonder if the Irish said, hey, what's in our heritage? That was kind of a general academic and spiritual quest the Catholic Church was on in the 60s and 70s. So that might have also contributed to the kind of renewal of and rediscovery of John Scotus Eriugena. But I don't know for sure. It might have been Irish nationalism. But there
Irish
were
as an
poets.
independence, Ireland as an independent state, and the
Yeah.
revival of the Gaelic language and stuff, all that.
That might have also had
after
something.
the 20s.
Yeah, that might have happened somewhere in there. And there were Irish poets earlier than the 60s. Oh gosh, who's a famous Irish poet? Yeats. I think they knew about Eriugena. And that might have also kind of propelled or sparked, resurgent interest in him. Yeah, some of those like late 18th century, late 19th century, early 20th century Irish poets, they knew him. Before that, I'd have to investigate. I don't know where the interest came from. Yeah. But now the interest is, if we had this and not just Aquinas, the church might be a whole different story, because Aquinas kind of took the opposite end. Let's break everything apart, because that was the scholastic method in the Middle Ages. Break everything apart to understand it. Now he put it back together, but the church kind of stayed with the Catholic Church kind of stayed with, let's break things down, break it apart, get over-explain everything. Oh my God. And then of course, that's what we gave to all the Protestant churches. We didn't part ways without leaving with a parting gift. And that was to over-explain things. Oh man. Yeah. But good question. Anything else? Great. Yeah.
Chris?
I was kind of enchanted by the heading on our paper here, a Celtic way of liberation.
Yes.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
So it's this whole idea that for Eriugena, the mind is limited. We are limiting our own minds by being attached to creaturely things. And his way is, if we understand reality, what reality is, that everything is a theophany, then if we begin to see everything as theophanies and not just understand that with thought, but really treat a chair as a showing of God. And that takes a shift in mind, takes a liberation from conditioned thinking. And that happens through prayer, it happens through study. That's how the liberation happens. Well, prayer, study, and the natural world. That's kind of the tripod of Eriugena's Celtic way of liberation. Contemplation, so silent prayer, abandoning the intellect and dwelling in silence, within. And that's also the nothingness that we've been talking about, because there's not really a felt experience there. It's just kind of nothing. And yet it's very real. Paradox. The study that we've already been talking about a lot of just not only reading, but catching a mystic's experience, and then maybe that lights a fire in you to want to learn more and make more connections and talk and discuss. And then just being in nature, and maybe that's something we need to take more seriously. Not that you need to go out to the Grand Canyon or Mount Tetons, right? Or to the see the glaciers before they all melt away, or to the zoo. No, it's just to be out in nature, be under the sun, feel the grass, feel the air, and not be in human-made worlds. It's so funny that we we build these places and they're all us. The places that we build are just for us, and it's to keep out the natural world. I mean, if you find a mouse in your house, what do you tend to do? I want to get that out of here. We don't really want the natural world in our homes. Is that funny? Just thought of that. Eriugena might say, that's ridiculous. You are the natural. You are this world. You are a part of this world. And so to see, again, not just the beautiful things, and this is where it takes practice. It takes being prayerful and present to see a spider, to see a cockroach. And not that you have to start there, by the way. Don't start there. Don't start there. Okay. Go to the sunsets. Go to the sunsets. Go to your cats. Go to your dogs. Sometimes our children are just, that's enough. That's enough to see God right there. But his intention is that you see a spider as a theophany, because that's a creature too. That you see, a rat as a theophany. And frankly, when I see rats in television, I'm like, oh, they're not so bad. And then I see one on the streets of DC and I go, no, thank you. But that's a challenge, because when we feel that disgust, that might be a sign that, it's separate. I don't want that thing. I want to stay away from that thing. I keep using that word because we thingify lots of creatures. Lots of people are thingified. They become objects for our consumption and for our use, or objects to be avoided, right? So there's another liberative aspect to this nothingness. It's to treat every creature as a theophany. So we're back to the sacredness of all life. Does that help? Good. Well, that's a good place to end. Thank you so much for being with me tonight. Thank you at home. Time for bed. Yeah.